Good morning, everybody. This is a live emergency update as we have an enhanced risk that now has been issued by the Storm Prediction Center across southeastern Texas, just to the north of the Houston area. But Houston proper is very much included in this risk tomorrow afternoon. That includes the threat of tornadoes and all the way back to where the storms are going to fire, just to the east of the Austin area, maybe very close to Austin. And this is an emergency update for Team Dominator members. Looks like I just went live to everybody, so we'll just make this a live briefing to everybody now, of course, here. But thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Please dominate that like button. We're going to be activating live storm chase mode tomorrow across that area. And that's going to be, I'm going to be coming into Austin later on today. And then tomorrow morning, we're going to be starting a full court press live stream, multiple storm chasers in the field. And what definitely makes this setup kind of interesting is the magnitude of the low-level wind shear. So the low-level jet is going to be like 60 knots, 50 to 60 knots, maybe even stronger than that, potentially. And so any supercell storm that's mature, that has any depth in the atmosphere, is likely going to rotate and develop tornado potential. And there could even be a strong tornado or two down there across southeastern Texas. Typing up the emergency update right now. Tornado potential increasing. I wouldn't be surprised if a hatch area is added, just because if you get a tornado in this environment and you have 50 to 60 knot 1 kilometer winds, you have a very long low level shear vector, it's pretty hard for that tornado to not be particularly strong and even damaging. So I don't think it's going to be an outbreak of a bunch of weak tornadoes. I do think that if a tornado happens, it's going to have the potential to be strong and certainly damaging. And it's centered right around College Station too. So I think that the storms will fire between Austin and College Station, but we're about to take a closer look at the models right now. Let me type this up here. All right, just typed it up. Probably going to have to use the rental car route, which is always a little bit dangerous these days. Rental cars aren't what they used to be, at least with storm chasing, that's for sure. There's a lot of fine print in there, so if you do blow the windows out or something by accident, if you're out there storm chasing, that can be an issue. So here's the NAM forecast 0 to 1 kilometer energy helicity index, and this is a composite index between surface-based CAPE or surface-based instability and 0 to 1 kilometer shear, which is low-level shear. And that's the most important ingredient, in my opinion, that determines whether supercell storms tighten up at the low levels. Usually you want to target the nose of these instability axes, and you've got a warm front that's going to be lifting up through the Texas piney woods. You've got a Pacific front pseudo dry line that's north-south oriented into central Texas. And this is at 21Z, so we're talking about 3 p.m. Central Standard Time when that Pacific front arrives near the I-35 corridor. And I think that storms are probably going to initiate from north to south along this corridor. And you're likely going to see an abundance of storms too. That's also another potential weakness with a setup like this, is there's going to be a ton of storms just bubbling up through Texas, central and eastern Texas, throughout the course of the day. And some of those dominant storms, though, are going to be the ones that are able to turn to the right and take advantage of that low-level wind shear. And look at the photograph up here in the upper right-hand portion of the screen. That's basically a way to plot the wind shear that a storm experiences. And your storm motion vector is off to the northeast. That's at 40 knots. So compared to yesterday when I went live, I was a little bit worried that the storm motion might be a little bit too slow, and you'd have all those little low-topped bean-shaped supercells moving south to north with a lot of meridional storm motions, and then a couple would break off, turn to the right, and develop tornado potential. Well, it looks like the wave must be ejecting a little bit faster than what the models were showing yesterday, because that storm motion right there at 40 knots is going to make for a longer storm relative inflow vector at the surface and up through a kilometer. And that means that you're going to have storms that are larger in size, larger in mass, capable of turning right and experiencing some of this upper level southwest to northeast oriented winds. And that's going to encourage more of a southwest to northeast storm motion. And look at that low level jet. That low level jet's going to be pushing 60 knots at 21Z. That's during the daylight hours. So we're going to be talking about daytime tornado potential, also extending into tomorrow evening and the overnight time period. You've got a south-southeasterly surface wind at 15 knots, and then the wind just above that near 60 knots. That's like 45 knots of bulk shear. More than sufficient to get these storms to wrap up at the low levels. And another ingredient that I'm seeing that's favorable for a decent tornado potential is the elevated mix layer. That's a mid-level dry slot up here. Notice the green line, that's the dew point, and when it gets separated from the red line like that, that's indicative of dry air. And when you have that dry air at the mid-levels of the atmosphere over top this moisture at the low levels, that sets the stage for instability. That's when you get the clear air over top, just explosive supercell development all around you. You'll see a cumulus field, low-level clouds just racing south to north in that 50 to 60 knot low-level jet that you see right there. And so it does look like there's going to be a threat of even a strong tornado or two. And definitely sign up for those notifications, because we're going to be going live with a full court press of storm chasers, multiple chasers in the field. Look at these numbers here. Greater than 400, 0 to 1 kilometer storm relative helicity, 0 to 3, greater than 500. So the wind shear is incredibly strong for a setup like this. And it does feel like the NAM model has been all over this since the beginning. And it does look like the wave is a little bit faster. This is the upper level storm system. It's a cold core system, of course, because we're talking about the mid-latitudes here. So you've got a cold blob of air, basically a cold blob of air of cyclonic spin right there. So there you can see your cold core aloft, and this thing is definitely moving a little bit faster. Then you have your belt of strong winds just to the southeast of it. That coincides with the temperature gradient due to the thermal wind relationship there, and of course your strongest temperature gradient kind of in that portion of the trough. And it's timed perfectly when it ejects from the Mountain West and across the southern plains, because you have this jet streak that has a subtropical connection to a little bit higher up in the troposphere, and through the action of shear vorticity, you're deepening this trough, and it's amplifying as it's ejecting across the southern plains, and you get a lot of diffluence aloft too, downstream over Texas. And then we'll look at some of the other models too, but just look at that energy helicity index, and by noon or so, you've got a nice blob here near just to the south of Austin. Looks like your north-south boundary is going to be set up right over the I-35 corridor. So that's where I think these storms are going to initiate. They're going to have mid to upper 60s dew points too. Look at these big 60s dew points pumping northward. There's your north-south boundary. Basically, as a dry line or a Pacific front, your dew points do fall off, but very gradually off to the west. So I certainly would call this more of a Pacific front. And you do have a bit of a fall off in the temperatures too as they go down into the 50s, back behind it, out ahead of it, up into the 70s. And the NAM model does a much better job at handling these wintertime setups, and you get a little bit closer. It handles the elevated mix layer well, the amount of cloud cover that's going to be burned off by that mid-level dry slot, and it handles the instability a lot better than the global models do days in advance. So that's why I use the global models, mostly just to kind of see the shape of the warm sector. And this is going to be the shape of the warm sector here over the southeast Texas. This is a significant tornado parameter at 18Z. So it looks like we're going to be starting pretty early tomorrow, probably around noon or so. And you can see the greater, darker colors there. The stronger indices are kind of in the northern quarter of that instability axis. And look at that surface-based instability, 69 over 68, dry slot just above the ground. 380, 0 to 1 kilometer shear. So that looks pretty significant right up there. A lot of those bright colors in the northern edge of that instability axis. Now let's jump over to the HRRR model, but let's look at it within the context of where our trough is ejecting. And watch it intensify too. Look at that. Between 18Z and 0Z. And it's got this ripper of a jet streak coming right around the southern edge, right at 0Z. And you've got all this diffluence. Even though I'm looking at the level of non-divergence, you go up to 300 millibars, and you can just tell the jet streak is nosing right into northeast Texas here. There's going to be a lot of lift, diffluence, with the wind going this way, more west, curving off to the north of that is going to create a lot of lift across Texas. Let me lower that down so you can see the trough too a little bit better. See the core of the trough. Look at that thing. And it's intensifying as it ejects. It's got this bulbous end on the southern edge here, moving into southwestern Oklahoma. Pretty strong winds on the south side of it, subtropical connection even. Look at the surface-based instability that develops. Surface-based Cape. There's your instability axis at 0Z, so it does get a little bit pinched. But at 21Z, notice how it stays west of the Houston area. But I do think that that warm front is going to basically reside across downtown Houston through a large swath of the afternoon. So if you get any of those supercell storms that move on shore near the Houston area, I do think those are going to have the potential of producing a tornado. And it looks like you have a little bit of a bulge here in the Pacific front too, into central Texas. So I think with the NAM model, it's trending a little bit slower. I may want to start off near the I-35 corridor. Look at the instability being predicted by the HRRR. You're talking near 2,000 joules per kilogram Cape. There, look at all those yellows. That's big time convective available potential energy tomorrow. Right at about peak heating, you got all these yellows. And interestingly, the HRRR brings that instability pretty far north. Elevated instability north of that. So I think that you're going to get some hail producers into southern Oklahoma. Dallas could even get in on the hail action. And then you've got this kind of pseudo dryline Pacific front action here. So I'm probably going to target the northern edge of that instability where you still have the best wind shear. Let's look at this significant tornado parameter. Look at that down here near College Station, a little bit to the east. And I bet you're going to get these prefrontal confluence lines too. You can already kind of see them when you extrapolate it down to the western Gulf of Mexico. So I'm thinking this is going to be a pretty significant severe weather event. Let's now look at the HRRR. And it looks like you get some HP grinders down there near Houston tomorrow, even potentially by early afternoon. Look at that storm down there. 18Z. That's at about noon Central Time. Already down near Houston. So I might have to be up pretty early tomorrow if I'm arriving in the Austin area. I'm going to have to blast east, maybe on I-10 toward Houston. And it looks like already by noon, you've already got HP storms already just on the northwest side of Houston. And you already start to get the hint at storms initiating a little bit further west on the Pacific front too. These are going to be warm frontal storms. So to me, it looks like your instability axis is going to be shaped like that, and you're going to get this early round, first of all, of some warm frontal storms out near the Houston area. That's by about 1 p.m. Look at that near Houston. And we can pick a sounding there, kind of right in the representative inflow environment. And you're looking at 72/68 and a hodograph that is definitely supportive of tornadoes, even some strong in the initial storm motion. Before that jet streak ejects, it's going to be southwest to northeast at about 20 knots. Pretty big hodograph wrapping around it. Those storms initially will be relatively small in size though too. And I think that once that jet streak ejects, they might start to get a little bit larger. So you'll probably start off with some of those bubblers near the Houston area. They might congeal, form larger HP storms. But still, you do have this well-defined dry slot even over the Houston area tomorrow by about noon. And look at that low-level jet too. 50 knots just above the ground. Southwest to northeast at 50. Very deep moisture too. Plenty of moisture out there. 72/68. Those are your low-level thermodynamics. Big low-level jet. And I like the directional shear too, between the low-level jet and the winds aloft. So the winds in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere are a little bit more westerly, west-southwesterly, over top those southwesterly winds at the low-level jet level. Deep moisture, and this dry slot also. Whenever you get those kind of in the central eastern U.S., when you're taking elements of the Great Plains and pushing them east with Gulf of Mexico moisture, it usually sets the stage for big problems. And then I think this is eventually going to lift northeast of the warm front, and if you chase this, you might get caught kind of in Houston traffic around 2 p.m. because that's when you're going to start to get initiation along the Pacific front / dry line out here to the west of Houston. And there's your warm front. Basically, it's going to set right up to the Houston area. And if you chase this, it could get some tornadoes early around noon or 1, and then I think it's time to retreat back to the Pacific front, where it looks like storms are going to initiate once again. Big low-level jet too. Look at the 850 winds. core of the low-level jet is right over the instability axis, right over the max surface-based instability too. So there's your 50-knot low-level jet over southeast Texas. That's going to set the stage for big problems, tornado potential. So if you know anybody in the Houston area, definitely share this stream. Share our stream tomorrow. We're going to have multiple storm chasers in the field work in this area just to the west of Houston, probably up near the nose of that 50-knot low-level jet. The HRRR is hinting at a couple of different rounds. Maybe a supercell initiating near the Houston area tomorrow at about noon to 1 p.m. Might cross the warm front, become a little bit elevated, and then renewed development along the Pacific front to the west of Houston. Just kind of look at these models for the first time too, so I always like to share my initial impressions with everybody. Look at all these little bean-shaped supercells that develop along that Pacific front, and you still have this one to the northeast of Houston that's approaching the Sabine River. That's probably going to be an elevated HP storm here that might produce some tornadoes near Houston around noon. And then we'll have to watch this Pacific front for the development of supercells. Right now, the 12Z HRRR isn't really that aggressive with the development of these storms along the Pacific front, but I wouldn't be surprised if those are going to have tornado potential. Looking at the updraft helicities, the 12Z HRRR only has that one warm frontal storm that goes up right through the Houston area. Basically just has this one grinder of a supercell that goes right through near downtown Houston all the way up through the Sabine River, developing out here at about noon as the warm front lifts up. But the latest HRRR doesn't really convect the Pacific front much, or you'd see all these little streaks, helicity streaks off of that as well. So that's a trend to watch from this morning through this evening, is to see if there's going to be more development along the Pacific front there in southeastern Texas. But right now, the HRRR is definitely showing that long track supercell. Goes right through downtown Houston, approaching the Sabine River. Let's see what last night's showed. Last night showed that warm frontal zone lighting up across the Texas piney woods to the north of Houston. So that does seem to be a bit of a change, is that last night's HRRR definitely showed that Pacific front lighting up. You can see these helicity tracks a lot more, but it still showed this early one a little bit further to the northwest of Houston, right along the warm frontal zone, and eventually approaching the Sabine River, probably being more of an elevated supercell when that updraft helicity track thickens up a little bit near the Sabine River. But you could definitely see a difference. Let's see what the 3-kilometer NAM is showing. These wintertime events are interesting because the convective allowing models sometimes don't really handle them very well. And it looks like the 3-kilometer NAM doesn't really have much in the way of these mesocyclones. Has a lot of bubblers though developing across East Texas. And it looks like the 3-kilometer NAM model may have too many storms out there, which could be a limiting factor on the tornado potential. There's your instability axis. A lot of these warm frontal storms, but it's probably just that the 3-kilometer NAM kind of, I would think that with that strong elevated mix layer coming in over top that moisture, that you definitely get a lot of supercell storm structures. So looks like it's possible though that this convective blob over the Gulf of Mexico sometimes can disrupt the low-level jets a little bit. Little mesoscale convective system over the northwest Gulf. So I'm definitely going to trend toward the HRRR model now in time. It looks like the 3-kilometer NAM is a little bit botched. Let's see what the overnight tornado potential looks like. We'll go to about 8 or 9 o'clock. Does look like the axis of that low-level jet shifts into central Louisiana. Look at that, up near the Alexandria area, eventually up toward Natchez again. Let's see how the instability looks into central Louisiana. None. So the low-level jet kind of outruns the instability. Your instability is back here across the Texas piney woods in the overnight hours. Let me go back and see where that low-level jet is. It's still back here across East Texas, so still plenty of good low-level flow across East Texas, 50 to 60 knots out there. Let's take a look at some of the other models. See how the global models look. And I was talking with some friends online how these global models during late fall into winter setups a lot of times underdo the surface temperature, underdo the surface instability. So a lot of times I just use the GFS model to kind of see generally the shape of the warm sectors. But there's your low-level jet, 50 knots out there across East Texas. A little bit thicker here than some of the other models we're showing too. Looking at the EHI, the instability is suppressed way down to the south. And then it looks like that instability gets focused a little bit more so over the Houston area. Picking a forecast sounding right in the middle of that. Still get a lot of these soundings that support tornado potential. And even the global models here, even the GFS, hints at a pretty nice elevated mix layer. And so I think when you get that dry slot in the mid-levels here coming over top, that deeper moisture, usually that's going to clear out a lot of the cloud cover. And when it moves over top that deep moisture, those are kind of the basics of instability out there for these storms. Thanks, Team Dominator members. Thanks for joining this live stream. This was supposed to be a Team Dominator member stream, but I ended up going live and selected visibility as public, so we're going to make this a public live stream. But there's the enhanced risk by the Storm Prediction Center. Zoom out. Looks like I've been zoomed in all day today. So there's some of the text on the latest enhanced risk. Ooh, low pressure, that Northwest Texas. We were looking at that Vortmax. It's a little bit faster than the yesterday's NAM was showing. Seems like the HRRR is in line with the global models and the timing of that upper system. Conditional setup for supercells and a few tornadoes is forecast on Thursday as low-level moisture increases well ahead of the upper wave. Warm front pushes north through the period. Impressive storm relative helicity values, 300 to 400 meters squared per second squared, overlapping the instability axis. Primary negative factors for more substantial severe weather event include the overall nebulous warm advection forcing mechanism and early day storms, warming temperatures aloft south of the mid-level jet, and the ability of storms to fully ingest a saturated boundary level air mass and utilize the lower portions of the hodograph is also in question. They opted to introduce the 10% area. That's Ryan Jewell. He's a veteran forecaster too out there. It's a Storm Prediction Center. Fairly good forecaster out there. And that's the outlook that was issued last night. There's also a marginal risk down in southern Louisiana the very next day that I might have to chase. So we could have a potential 2-day chase ahead. But definitely the event's going to be peaking tomorrow across southeastern Texas, and then a marginal risk across the mid-south the very next day. Good, looks like we got a good group here, everybody. Thanks. Thanks, Gina K, for helping out. Thanks, everybody. We'll insert one. Does look very chaseable tomorrow. Just because I usually forecast as a storm chaser, worst case scenarios out there, ceilings of the events. That's what really gets you out the door a lot of times. Look at that instability too. Look at that connection to the Western Gulf of Mexico. You got a connection to these 70 plus dew points out there over the Western Gulf. Nice wedge of instability. And it does look like this warm front is going to start off around the Houston area, just to the southwest of Houston by midday, and then lift up toward the Sabine River Valley. And it's possible that a couple of those storms that get going to the northwest of Houston and lift off to the northeast could even produce a significant tornado or two. So I'm probably going to have to get down to this area just to the west of Houston at around 11 a.m. tomorrow. Start stream live just to and follow that storm all the way up toward the Sabine River. But you can definitely tell there's a deep connection to that moisture. Look at all that moisture out over the Western Gulf. 70s dew points out there. Upper 60s streaming northward. Nice arc. So if the HRRR stays consistent, then I may want to get on that early development just to the west of Houston and then maybe retreat back to the Pacific Front if it looks like that's going to develop. Let's compare what the dew points look like between the NAM and the HRRR. Real similar. Look at these dew points. It's hard to believe that there's not going to be good surface-based storms that are able to take advantage of that lower portion of the hodograph, especially down here over southeastern Texas, because you almost get these semi-tropical type soundings, and we have that elevated mixed layer coming over top. I wouldn't be surprised if these surface temperatures are even a little bit higher, into the middle 70s probably to the west of Houston. I bet we'll be a little bit closer to 74, 75. And I pick a sounding out there looking at the convective temperature. Convective temperature is 76 degrees. So I do think that if we can get into the middle 70s, we'll be talking about an increased likelihood of tornadoes, because you'll get more surface-based storms. And you can find the convective temperature down here. You can read some of these numbers. There's the convective temperature right there, 76 degrees, given these thermodynamics. And beneath that stout elevated mix layer, when the green line separates from the red line, dew point temperature and regular temperature, that's when you get a reduction in those mid-level clouds. You get a lot more surface heating. Surface temperature will increase through the 70s. Good, Brandon Clement's calling me. I think that's about a drone propeller. I need a new drone propeller, so I'll call him right back. But look at how the nose of the low-level jet at 21Z, according to the 12Z HRRR, is nosing right up against that warm front. That's why you get these supercell storms that'll anchor on that warm frontal zone. You get a lot of easterly winds associated with it too. Look at the surface winds right there. Notice how these surface winds in the warm frontal zone are more out of the southeast. And then the winds to the west of it are out of the due south. More due southerly winds right there. And then along the warm frontal zone, you have that nice belt of southeasterly surface winds. Very close to that instability too. Gotta be kidding me, you 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 gotta be kidding me. And then you kind of get a fanning out of the moisture. I do think you're really gonna need these deeper dew points. So I'm gonna watch pretty closely here the evolution of these storms in particular near College Station, but I do think that this HP storm that develops just to the north, just to the west of Houston, moves very close to downtown area, right along that warm frontal zone. You could get kind of an early morning ripper, I-10 ripper out there that develops out to the west of Houston, moves right through the downtown area, and then we'll be approaching the Sabine River Valley. And it all depends too on whether these storms initiate back behind it too. Some of these beans get rocking again, then watch out. And so I'm trying to decide whether I should take the Dominator 4 and chase this. I think if it's Louisiana, central Louisiana eastward, I take Dominator 4. But I'm probably going to have to do the rental car method. I don't think that there's going to be very large hail with these. These probably aren't going to produce very large hail, which is some good news. I don't see that warm nose on this, but you can kind of see it, evidence of it in the hodograph of some sinking air almost. And that might be why the Pacific front's not convected. Kind of see up here how you have that little kink, the reverse kink in the hodograph up around 3 kilometers or so. Sometimes that's associated with some sinking motion in the atmosphere, a little bit of stable air that will develop even though you've got this big low-level jet at the hodograph. A lot of times when you get these concave areas in the middle part of the hodograph, it usually means that there's a little bit of sinking air or some subsidence that's aloft. So I think that's probably why the 12ZH-RRR is not convecting this Pacific front. It's a little bit less pronounced though if you go just a hair further south. We're watching this concave zone right there in the hodograph, just above this big low-level jet. So you still got a low-level jet that's up near 50 knots, and you gotta wonder if there's going to be like a little sinking motion associated with that. What do you guys think? Add in the comments. Still got that stout elevated mix layer, a lot of directional shear. It does look like there could be some low-level clouds too. You can see how the green line and the red line are just over top each other right down there. Even though you've got some pretty good low-level thermodynamics. That means there's probably going to be a lot of cloud cover associated with these two, which might limit the instability. So I think that the safe bet is probably to get on this early storm. Develops by late morning to the west of Houston, so I'm going to have to wake up very early, 6 a.m. probably, cruise down here to the west of Houston. Probably should have gone to Houston maybe tonight instead. And let's see where the warm front is by that time at 11 a.m. There's the warm frontal zone. So that storm develops right along the warm front to the west of Houston. You can see the hole in the surface-based instability there. Right by 11 a.m. There it is. It looks like you get the development of a storm. At the HRRR has been pretty consistent. Takes all the way up to the northeast. You've got your warm frontal zone right there too. So I do think that that's going to have the chance of producing a tornado or two. Still see that hole in the instability. It's right along the warm frontal zone by 18Z. Look at that. 0 to 1 EHIs. It's right along the bulge in the EHI there to the west of Houston. And then you start getting the development of some real instability to the west of that storm. Yeah, it looks like you'll want to get on that storm early there, just to the north of Houston, and then big instability starts to build to the west of that. Well, we did have that 10% area that was issued by the Storm Prediction Center. Looks like AccuWeather hired me for this setup, so you guys get to watch me on the AccuWeather network too. That's good news. I work for AccuWeather a lot to try to help cover the expenses of the storm chase. Then we stream live here, of course. Kind of a diffuse Pacific front, so I am leaning toward going after this warm frontal zone. Storms initiating just to the west of the Houston area, maybe passing just on the north side of Galveston Bay there. I bet it's going to be a little bit further north. I bet that those storms develop to the northwest of Houston and then interact with that warm frontal zone. Everybody, please check out our latest video too. We produced our 2024 seasonal tornado forecast. And during grad school, I did a lot with seasonal climate prediction using Pacific Ocean sea surface temperatures and predicting what happens downstream across North America. And I think that this is a pattern right here during late winter of 2023 is kind of an extension of what's going to happen this winter and into the early portion of 2024. And we predict that Texas is going to get an above average 150 tornadoes in 2024. But definitely check out that video that we just posted I'm seeing the evidence of a potential prefrontal convergence band too that could develop to the west of Houston. That'll coincide with peak heating. But I'm definitely leaning toward working the warm frontal zone. Remarkable agreement between the regular NAM and the 12ZHRRR. Look at all that. Remarkable agreement. How's it going, everybody? Missed you during this calm fall that's been happening here. Yeah, I'm going to be going over hodographs and SKUTs a lot for Team Dominator members during this winter. I'm going to do some tutorials and stuff on hodographs. I am actually at my mom's house right now, but this is where Gizmo is retired as well. Gizmo retired here, upstate South Carolina. I kind of use it as my Dixie Alley headquarters this time of year. And then I moved to the Southern Plains later on too. So I moved back to the Southern Plains during the peak spring. The Dominators are out in Norman, Oklahoma. I don't think we're going to be taking Dominators out here this time just because the terrain is pretty intense. You get a lot of pine trees out here. It's called the Texas Piney Woods. That Crockett, Texas tornado that we saw, March 2022, was kind of down in that area. A lot of power flashes. I was with Captain Vanover during that one. I am going to be pretty interested in seeing how the models trend throughout the day today. Gotta wait for the 18Z HRRR. And this is classic El Nino, where it's really warm across the country. You've got split blow too, dominating North America. You got a southern branch of the jet. You've got a northern branch of the jet. Abnormally warm temperatures as well dominate out here. Oh boy, looking way out into early December. We actually kind of have a flip-flop of what was forecast in the last couple of days. Looks like the tendency for a big ridge across the western U.S. and a trough in the northeast, which is good for the ski resorts across the northeast. Could get a lot of lake effect, to get more lake effect up there. I know we saw a couple of feet of snow, a couple of those locations downwind of Lake Erie, Lake Ontario. Look at that cold air loft, minus 35 degrees C, just ripping right over southern Lake Michigan into early December. So this would be big for lake effect snow. And this is a lot different than what the CPC put out, and even a tweet that I put out yesterday that was talking about very warm temperatures. Now you've got that ridge axis displaced way to the west, and you've got this cold air mass dominating the eastern U.S. Look at that. Might have to get out there and start ripping some lake effect, but it looks like the surface temperatures don't get that cold until a little bit behind that upper feature. In the long range. So that's why I like to stay focused on the near term. This is our wave right here that we're watching. The upper jet cruising through northern Mexico by tomorrow morning. And that's definitely a weakness of this pattern, is that the wave is kind of lagging way behind the target area, even as close to the event as tomorrow morning. But it looks like it ejects fast and it intensifies. So it goes from being relatively weak in North Texas over that 12-hour period. Look at that. There's northern Mexico. North Mexico. And then watch as I go another 12 hours. Bang! Intensifies as it goes through the Texas Panhandle. Big belt of that strong flow on the south side of it. Difluence downstream. And then the wave just fluffs out the next day on Friday. So probably just be a one-day chase on this one. And we try to get that pattern shifted. You always get a tendency this time of year for this ridge trough pattern across the U.S. But I know that there's a lot of warm water in the North Pacific. The NPO is pretty strongly positive, which means that we should have kind of more of a tendency for a western U.S. trough. And let me show you. I don't want to plot them yet. I'll show you what the current one looks like. So you can see a raging El Nino. And you've also got that NPO across the north. A lot of warm water in the North Pacific as well. Look at that warm water up there. And this is just fed like a fire hose up from Japan. And eventually this is going to recenter, I think, across the North Central Pacific. This warm water up here, that's the North Pacific Oscillation, or the NPO. And then you've got this mature El Nino dominating the Eastern Tropical Pacific. You've got a little bit of what's left of our 3 years of La Nina with that neutral or cold PDO horseshoe there, Pacific Decadal Oscillation. That'll probably neutralize between now and the spring. I think that El Nino is going to continue in this state. I was looking at the subsurface and I'm not seeing any cold water below the subsurface. So I think that the NPO being warm up here should encourage this trough, a western U.S. trough. And that means that you get more severe weather in the central U.S. And you get a more active tornado alley, more active southern plains as well ahead of that trough. There's your El Nino zone, and it's a very mature El Nino. Sometimes these will have a tendency during the winter to kind of focus in the central Pacific, and then you'll get neutral and even cold anomalies that'll start replacing those, but I don't think that's going to be happening until about next summer. And at that point, then you'll probably get drought conditions continuing across the northern plains too. But I do think that's going to lead to a pretty active tornado season in 2024. So be sure to check out our latest video on that. Go say hi to Gizmo. How's it going there? Hi, everybody. Yeah, it's not too cold. It's been very warm during this El Nino year. So my uncle that lives in the upper Great Lakes, he's definitely not disappointed in this at all, in this weather. Above average temperatures up there. I'm not as good at the long-term climate. I'm a little bit better at the short-term climate and below, down to the storm chasing, especially the small-scale weather. Yeah, in Halifax, Nova Scotia, you've got the very warm Gulf Stream up there too. So I think we're just going to have a couple of years of this extreme warmth, these warm patterns. Probably get a lot of tornadoes, though, across the southern U.S., the southern branch of the U.S., That's why we're predicting Texas and Florida to have above normal tornadoes. A lot of times you get a lot of tornadoes during the winter time and into the early spring in Florida during these El Nino years. Yeah, storm chasing certainly is getting a lot more popular these days. That's for sure. It's taken off. So we're also going to be deploying a new Team Dominator app. So keep an eye out for that. Wait till you guys see that. You might start to see little signs of it during the live streams here and there. We still got to figure out exactly how that's going to be handled. But I definitely am seeing tomorrow an uptick, if you will. I know that's a really popular word that's happening a lot these days. Uptick in weather. Let's take a look at the surface map too. Dew points right now are only around 50 across the Texas Gulf Coast. And those are going to go up big time. You're going to see like a near 20 degree Fahrenheit increase in the dew points across the Texas Gulf Coast. You're around 50. And so what I'm going to decide through the models tonight and through tomorrow morning is, do I want to get on some of that early development just to the west or to the northwest of Houston and track that toward the Sabine River, or do I want to play the Pacific Front or play both? It's possible that if you get a little bit of subsidence up around 3 kilometers that it might suppress convection along the Pacific Front, and the only storm of the day that could be the tornado producer could be that warm frontal one that develops just to the west of Houston and then tracks up toward the Sabine River. Those are my initial thoughts on that. This is another great model site here. College of DuPage. These are always pretty good to look at. NAM Nest model's a good one. I like to look at the wrap model too is one of my favorite models. Let me center this again. I am going to try to bring the subsonic sensor out here too, again. I don't think it goes out near far enough yet. I'm not as familiar with this model interface yet, but you can look at your short range ensembles too. Kind of look at the probability of cape reaching a certain level. Look at that. Got it, buddy. This is pretty good for looking at the shape of the instability axis. And this is your probability of surface-based cape exceeding 1,000. You got near 100% probability up there near the nose of that. A little bit less near the Houston area with that warm frontal zone, but boy, just to the west of Houston too. Plenty of surface-based cape. I don't think cape's going to be an issue. Look at that axis. It does look like it's shifting a little bit further west. That's at 21Z. Does look like your instability axis is shifting a little bit west with the morning models. So we'll have to see if that trend continues through this evening or not. It's a probability of cape exceeding 500 joules per kilogram, 42 hours out. It does look like at around 6Z, so about 3Z, so that's about 9 or 10 p.m. that you could get some decent instability moving it into the Houston area with that warm frontal zone too. So there might be a couple of rounds of severe weather. The HRRR is showing that one storm that develops along the advancing warm front. And there's your instability the next day on Friday, showing you that zone over southeastern Louisiana into southern Mississippi that could deal with some bubblers that may even produce an isolated tornado or two. So that's the main forecast, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We've got our enhanced risk, day 2 enhanced risk right here, tornado potential 10%. That has been increased by the Storm Prediction Center in their latest outlook. I think the day 2 comes out in an hour. But there you can see that zone. They might shift that 10% a little bit further south based on the latest HRRR guidance, kind of showing those warm frontal HP storms that develop and come pretty close to the Houston metro. So I hope everybody has a great day. Be sure to hit that notification bell. I'm going to be out there streaming live tomorrow. Brian's going to be providing radar breakdowns and everything too. Thank you, everybody, and never stop chasing.